They're watching you. More than 4,000 satellites circle the Earth. Every day, they uncover new mysterious phenomena. Some defy explanation.
I'm just puzzled. It just doesn't fit.
Whatever it is, can't be good news.
A river of light flows across the Indian subcontinent.
You don't expect to see a fiery streak snaking below you.
Nazi spies leave secret signals in war-torn Britain.
And it's possible that these markers were used to guide in other spies or perhaps an invasion.
And a pink lake glows in the Brazilian rainforest.
It looks like something bad happened here.
Baffling phenomena, mysteries from space. What on earth are they? August 21st, 2011. On board the International Space Station, an astronaut captures an unusual image over southern Asia.
Looking down from the ISS, you don't expect to see a fiery streak snaking below you.
It looks almost like a line of lava flow.
But there are no active volcanoes in the area.
It doesn't look like a road, it doesn't match a city, and yet it goes for hundreds of miles.
The line of light cuts right across the Indian subcontinent. Despite its remarkable color and vast size, it's possible the burning streak could have a simple explanation.
You can see cities and towns that are lit up. Could this just be a main road?
It's certainly possible. From space, the brightest road on the planet is the Las Vegas Strip in Nevada. It radiates with the light of more than 20 million bulbs and 15,000 miles of neon tubes. But scale analysis of the image taken over India reveals that the glowing streak is far wider than any road.
This is a line of lights 450 feet wide. That would be a superhighway 40 lanes wide.
The intense orange glow doesn't look anything like conventional street lighting.
The color is striking. It's a very vivid orange against the white lights of the cities. So, it's perplexing. What could be causing that?
Is there something about that color that's important to this story?
What else glows with an orange light? If it's not a road, it could be a fire.
Fire plays a prominent role in some of India's vast and spectacular religious festivals. One of the most remarkable is called Dussehra.
Dussehra is a Hindu festival, and different regions in India celebrate it in their own unique way.
Dussehra commemorates the victory of the mother goddess Durga over a shape-shifting demon called Mahisashura. It's the culmination of 10 days of religious festivities and brings about new life to the earth.
On the 10th night of its celebration, it culminates in a spectacular fire torch display. A huge processional pilgrimage of a motorway of fire torches. It's carried by at least 10,000 people within each celebration.
But even 10,000 torch-wielding festival goers wouldn't be enough to create such a vast blaze across India that was visible from space.
If this were a parade, we would need millions of people to make a line this long and this bright.
So if it's not a superhighway or a fiery parade, what else could it be?
Astronaut Leroy Chow has seen something like this before.
What this looks like to me is that it's some kind of a border or a dividing line.
When we look closer and compare this line to a map, well, it maps perfectly to the border between India and Pakistan.
The division between these two countries only dates from 1947, when they were granted independence from the British Empire. Ever since, this border has been the site of dozens of skirmishes and dangerous standoffs between the rival militaries and terrorist groups.
This is a very heavily defended and militarized border between two countries that are technically allies and friends, but really don't like each other very much. It stretches from the Himalayas all the way to the Arabian Sea.
The borderline forms a formidable barrier to any unauthorized crossings.
One of the reasons that the fence was put up is because India wants to control movement of insurgents from Pakistan to the Indian side of the border.
It's patrolled by thousands of men on each side. There's no question that the area is immensely tense. Both sides are waiting for something to trigger some form of reaction from the other side. There's always the possibility of an outbreak of gunfire or worse.
The Indian government has installed high walls, barbed wire, and anti-personnel mines to defend the vulnerable border. The fiery orange glow comes from powerful sodium vapor lamps, which illuminate almost the entire length of it.
It's floodlit so nobody can get across, even at night.
The orange glow is from over 150,000 high-power floodlights. It's no wonder you can see it from space at night.
In 1962, a U-2 spy plane flying over Cuba takes a disturbing photograph.
It looks like a Star of David carved into the ground.
The image pushes the U.S. military to the brink of war.
Imagine when the photo interpreters came across this site, it shook the White House and the CIA to the core.
This was very nearly the end of the world as we know it.
August 1962. An American U-2 spy plane flying over communist Cuba takes a deeply disturbing photograph.
Imagine you're taking pictures over hostile country. If you saw this, alarm bells would be ringing immediately.
The aerial image starts a chain of events that takes the United States to the brink of apocalypse. The picture was taken over La Coloma, 100 miles from the Cuban capital, Havana.
It stands out. You can look at this photo and you can see they're carving this out of very dense vegetation.
Round the outside, there are some clear trackways and other structures that look quite big. But the central feature really looks like a version of the Star of David.
For centuries, the Star of David has been a symbol of Judaism and, more recently, the State of Israel. Cuba is more than 6,000 miles from Israel, but this part of the world does have a little-known Jewish connection.
Some Jewish people fled Nazi Europe and they wanted somewhere where they could practice their religion in safety. And obviously Cuba was ideal. So there was quite a considerable Jewish population on the island.
In the 1950s, more than 15,000 Jews lived in Cuba. But historical records reveal that a decade later, at the time the photograph was taken, over 90% of them had fled the country.
Although the Jewish people felt they got somewhere safe, this was not the case. The rise of a communist government under Fidel Castro put them under pressure, and many of them left. So it's very unlikely that these are marks put in by any pro-Jewish movement.
Archaeologists look further back into the island's history for possible answers to what the shape could be. It bears a strong resemblance to a mystical symbol used by the shamans of many North American tribes.
Shamans are sort of intermediaries between a spirit world on the one hand and the earthly world on the other. Certainly among Native American communities, you find what are called medicine wheels, which look remarkably like the image. Medicine wheels were used by the shamans for healing purposes or to predict the future.
Cuba was once home to a mysterious tribe called the Taino. Their shamans conducted painful, drug-fueled rituals to access the spirit world.
Shame is found throughout the Native American world, but particularly the Tainos took it to a really fine art. And they went out of the earthly world into the spirit world by going into what was those trances. These trances would be through dancing, often taking hallucinated drugs, and would then pass into this other world where they would receive knowledge, which they could bring back to the society.
A large medicine wheel could play a part in such shamanic rituals, but scale analysis reveals the site is around 700 feet across.
They clearly were capable of carving geometric patterns on rocks, but this one is just far too big and far too elaborate.
To military image analysts, the photograph presents several telltale clues, suggesting the activity on the ground could have catastrophic consequences.
This is actually the first image I've been given where, without any doubt, I can tell you what it is. And it represents sort of the Cold War in one picture.
This seemingly innocuous image starts a chain reaction that would bring the U.S. to the brink of war.
If you saw these sites on a photograph and you put them to anybody in the Pentagon, alarm bells would be ringing immediately.
The pattern in the image is recognized as a footprint for a Soviet anti-aircraft missile system called an SA-2.
If you look at places where the Soviets helped set up SA-2 sites around the world, Cuba, Vietnam, later in other places, they all have the same looking footprint when viewed from above. Looks like a Star of David carved into the ground.
It's an unusual pattern, but not once you understand how these sites are constructed. Then it starts to make sense.
Analysts believe the site in the image was still under construction at the time the photo was taken. Imagery captured 3 months later by U.S. spy planes shows a fully operational missile base.
It's laid out in a pattern which allows you to make the best use of your missiles and guidance system.
Right there in the middle was a radar center. And then if you think about around there in sort of a circular pattern were the missile sites. And in this case, there were 6 missile sites for the SA-2 missiles. And then obviously you need to get back and forth, so they would build roads. This image is what essentially started the Cuban Missile Crisis.
In the early 60s, during the Kennedy administration, the Cuban Missile Crisis almost erupted into the Third World War. Fidel Castro asks the Soviet Union for weapons and missiles and military hardware, which they gladly send to Cuba.
Cuba's relationship with America was about as tense as you could get.
During the height of the missile crisis, U-2 spy planes took countless photographs over Cuba. These state-of-the-art aircraft could fly at altitudes up to 70,000 feet, over twice that of a commercial jet.
What the Soviets didn't know was what our capabilities were. They completely underestimated what we were capable of picking up.
The presence of the SA-2 anti-aircraft missiles tips off U.S. intelligence that the Soviets must be trying to protect something important. Further reconnaissance flights over the surrounding area soon discover the Soviet nuclear missiles. The U.S. government could not tolerate deadly weapons so close to home.
Right next door in Cuba, right across the water, the Russians, the Soviets had a foothold there. Was an amazingly frightening prospect.
These sites would trigger a 13-day crisis that brought 2 of the world's biggest superpowers to the brink of nuclear war.
Strategic Air Command B-52 bombers are now flying 24-hour mission.
After intense negotiations, the Russians backed down and removed their nukes. But short-range tactical missiles remained to protect Cuban airspace.
The Russians built 24 of these sites, and those 24 sites were all designed to shoot down aircraft that were flying over the island.
Today, modern aerial imagery of the same site shows no trace of the weaponry that triggered the crisis. The evidence of humanity's brush with annihilation is gone, but not forgotten.
The Cubans gave up all their nuclear missiles and the Soviets took them back to the Soviet Union.
The general public wasn't aware that this was going on until the very end when it became known. But it was an extremely, extremely tense period of time.
This was very nearly the end of the world as we know it.
A satellite passes high over the Amazon jungle in Brazil and spots a lake that glows with an impossible color.
This looks very disturbing.
It's a bright pink lake in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest. It looks like something bad happened here.
September 2003. The QuickBird 2 satellite orbits 280 miles over a remote part of Brazil and captures an extraordinary image.
That's a lake, and that's pink. They don't normally come in that color.
I'm wondering if there's something really, really wrong that's turned this water pink.
The mile-long lake is located in deep rainforest in the state of Para, central Brazil.
If you want to get to the bottom of what's going on here, it makes sense to look at the surrounding area.
A clue to the lake's disturbing color could come from a secretive nearby military base, the Campo de Provas, Brigadeiro Veloso.
This is a location where the Brazilian military tests its high-tech and most secretive weapons systems. The Brazilian government is maintaining high security of this installation and what actually goes on there.
For several years, Brazil had an active nuclear weapons program. And where was it based? Right here.
Officially, Brazil's nuclear program was abandoned in 1990. Since then, there have been no reports of contamination, radioactive or otherwise. If the base is not responsible, could the strange color be a geological phenomenon?
It is possible that this lake could be colored due to metal suspended in water.
There's a famous river in Spain called the Rio Tinto. If you look at pictures of the Rio Tinto, you'll see colors of yellow and orange and other colors like that, mainly from the iron oxides that are being carried along in the water.
Geologists question whether naturally occurring metals could be reacting with something in the lake, creating the vivid color.
The minerals themselves would not be pink, but they would turn pink when they're exposed to the air. And typically it's minerals such as manganese that would turn pink.
But it would be highly unusual for manganese to produce a color as vivid as that seen in the image.
We've got to look to some other kind of explanation.
One possible cause of contamination in the water is industrial activity. In 2015, a dam burst at Brazil's Germano mine, releasing 13 billion gallons of toxic waste into a nearby river. It turned the water a putrid pink and destroyed villages along its banks. Perhaps a similar accident is to blame here.
Something of this scale would have to be a pretty major incident.
There's a lot of mining in the Brazilian rainforest. There's large-scale industrial mining of iron ore. Also in the Amazon, there's a lot of rogue mining going on. Miners are mining for gold on a fairly large scale.
Intense international pressure means that the Brazilian government keeps a close watch on industrial activity in the Amazon. It's unlikely that an accident could be kept quiet for long.
If a lake this large was that polluted by a mining process, you would hope that somebody would have noticed and done something about it before this became public knowledge.
The search for answers leads investigators halfway around the world. Could another lake, over 10,000 miles away, offer a clue to what's happening here? The vivid pink hue of Australia's Lake Hillier is caused by a rare type of single-celled microalgae called Dunaliella salina.
Dunaliella salina uses different kinds of pigments to absorb light. Rather than green chlorophyll, it uses a pink-colored pigment.
The strange bubblegum-colored algae only thrive in very particular conditions, in water that's at least 5 times as salty as the ocean.
A lake in the Amazon rainforest being highly saline would not be what I would expect. A rainforest is a place with high levels of precipitation, and the only way to get a saline lake is to have a lot of evaporation.
Salty water is essentially toxic to vegetation. It's really, really unlikely that you're going to have such nice green land next to it. So that kind of rules that one out.
No known natural phenomenon can explain the pink water visible in the image. The nearby military base is the only factor that distinguishes this patch of jungle from the thousands of miles of surrounding rainforest.
Could the military installation have some sort of connection between the weapons that are being tested and the color of the water?
This base still performs advanced weapons testing. Some experts have proposed that a byproduct of munitions handling might be responsible.
There is something called pink water, which is formed after the washing of munitions. So you've got artillery shells that you want to fill with TNT, right? You're filling them away, you spill a bit. You definitely need to clean that up. And then when you wash it away, it just gets absorbed into the water.
As the TNT in the wastewater collects in the lake, it undergoes a chemical reaction powered by the sun.
It just looks clear like water. But when that water is exposed to sunlight, there's a photolytic reaction which causes that water to turn pink.
So the colored lake could be caused by large amounts of TNT dissolved in the water over decades of washing munitions.
The only way to get a final answer on why this lake is pink would be to actually go and test the water and test the soil around it. But because of the secrecy and because of the location, this may remain a mystery.
British military intelligence releases a cache of declassified secret World War II documents. One aerial image from 1945 shows bizarre shapes on the ground.
This is wartime, and the marks could only be seen from the air. So which side were they meant to be seen by?
There were Nazi spies in Britain, and it's possible that these markers were used to guide in other spies or perhaps an invasion.
February 2010. The British government declassifies a cache of secret World War II documents and releases them from the military archives. One aerial photograph shows bizarre shapes in the English countryside.
What the hell is it?
These circles are clearly meant to be seen from above, and the question's by whom?
The image was taken near the Tatton estate, 10 miles southwest of Manchester, England. Available records make no mention of who took the photo or why.
It was very, very common during the Second World War for aircraft to be sent up to experiment with cameras, to train the airmen how to do it, make sure everything was operating.
The mystery has stood unsolved for more than 70 years. Investigators consider whether localized magnetic fields in the ground itself could have caused the strange shapes.
Under the ground, you might get rocks, which will inhibit crop growth.
You'd be surprised the kind of complexity and shapes that you can get in the surface of the Earth from magnetic fields from ferrous rocks.
But the soil in this part of England is very chalky. Analysis of geological records also reveals no evidence of any magnetic metals such as iron deposits that might cause the shapes. If the markings are not natural, then what are they?
My first reaction on looking at this one is it basically a crop circle?
A crop circle is a large area of flattened crop, usually wheat, often barley, sometimes oilseed rape.
It's decorative. You see this fairly often, frankly, in crop circles that are cut into agricultural fields, particularly here in the U.S. You fly over the middle part of this country, and you'd be amazed at sort of the shapes and designs that you see.
Crop circles were first reported in the late 1970s. If these shapes are crop circles photographed during the Second World War, they would be the first on record. But close analysis of the image indicates the field the symbols are in does not contain crops of any kind. A different technique must have been used to create the shapes.
They probably cut the turf, or it was worn out, or some means of disturbing the soil.
A new theory suggests the strange symbols might have been made by the British military as targets for parachutists.
Parachutists had to practice somewhere, and one of the things they would have needed is a target to aim at. So it's just as likely that the British military put down these targets for their own parachutists to aim at as a training tool.
The nearest parachute base was just 4 miles away, but a detail in the image pokes a hole in the parachute theory. Close to the symbols is a small woodland. Trees would pose a threat to any parachutist landing nearby. A more alarming possibility is that these symbols are some kind of coded signal to aid invading Nazi forces.
It was known during the Second World War that there were Nazi spies in Britain, and it's possible that these markers were used to guide in other spies or perhaps an invasion.
It was a difficult process navigating for pilots at that time. So the idea that there might be land-based markers, well, of course they were using land-based markers.
Could these markings be a secret signal for invading German aircraft?
This fear, particularly following the fall of France and Dunkirk, that the Nazis were getting us ready for invasion. People were getting a little bit paranoid about what might be happening.
The British Air Force was constantly patrolling the countryside, looking for any signs that German sympathizers had left, directing German bombers towards military targets.
Declassified papers reveal that during the war, the British Secret Service feared Britain could be infiltrated by Nazi sympathizers, known as the Fifth Column.
A fifth columnist is essentially a spy, operating in one country but acting on the part of the opponents in a war, the enemy.
The nightmare scenario was an army of covert Nazis working in secret to pave the way for German domination.
There was a real terror that was a fifth column in Britain ahead of a Nazi invasion.
You have to put yourself in the mindset of the British people. They've seen this massive German war machine march through to the French coast. They're right across the water. You've got to be worried about an invasion.
The symbols lie on a direct flight path from Germany to one of the Luftwaffe's prime bombing targets, the port city of Liverpool. Liverpool was a critical port for the UK. The Atlantic supply convoys from Canada and the US were the only thing keeping Britain from starvation. The Luftwaffe inflicted devastating damage on the city, trying to sever this lifeline.
It fits into the espionage thriller concept that German agents were out there in the fields of England carving patterns and shapes in the fields to help guide German pilots for bombing raids. Nothing was ever proven. MI5 looked at this, and they could find no evidence that this was the case.
If these marks are not crop circles, and they're not actually caused by enemy activity, then what are they?
In 1945, the British Secret Service tried to figure this one out, and it was a puzzle then. 70 years later, it's still a puzzle. We have no idea.
Today, satellite imagery of this location reveals that the path and small woodland are still there, but the strange symbols are gone. If there is an answer to this mystery here, it is long buried. Giant mysterious symbols emerge from the sands of the desert in a former Soviet territory.
These features are absolutely enormous, bigger than the footprint of any of the pyramids?
The Soviets took on some of the most ambitious building projects in human history. So maybe that's what we're looking at here.
In 2007. An amateur archaeologist searches through online satellite imagery looking for ancient sites. He spots something strange, a three-armed shape in the middle of a barren desert landscape.
Searching online and finding this? What a fantastic find.
The satellite image was captured over the deserts of the Kazakh steppe in northern Kazakhstan.
It's not something you see in nature.
Why would anybody do that? What were they trying to say?
The massive geoglyphs in the Kazakh desert are so remarkable, they attract the interest of NASA scientists. They use satellite imagery of the area to conduct a remote investigation.
NASA, of course, is very excited by this, to see their equipment being used, not just for discovery in space, but also here on Earth.
Satellite photographs reveal that the three-armed shape is not the only large symbol in the area. Hundreds of weird geoglyphs are spotted strewn across the desert landscape, some featuring crosses, dots, rings, and lines.
They're beautiful, they're massive, and they show off the ability of mankind to do things that are impactful from distances as far away as space.
Scale analysis reveals the size of the structures.
Judging by the width of this road, this mound is approximately 7 meters in width, which is pretty large.
These features are absolutely enormous, bigger than the footprint of any of the pyramids.
So who built them and what are they for?
It's clear that these symbols are a massive feat of human engineering. Their location on the Kazakh steppe leads some to suspect that the former Soviet Union had a hand in creating them.
The Soviets took on some of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. Maybe that's what we're looking at here.
From the time of Stalin onwards, the Soviet Union was very, very keen on improving agriculture and terraforming, shaping the land to suit agriculture. Some of these projects were so large that they were designed to turn areas that were previously deserts actually into farmable land.
Patriots of the Soviet Republic set the pace in gathering the hay for the glorious Red Cavalry.
Soviet attempts to turn the largely deserts of Kazakhstan into farmable areas meant that they virtually drained the Aral Sea completely.
Records of Soviet agricultural experiments are now supposed to be accessible to the public. But available records make no mention of work in this area. If the Soviets didn't construct the earthworks, could they come from further back in the bloody history of the Kazakh steppe?
With these satellite images, of course, there's a limitation. They tell us there's something there. So it prompts us to go find these things on the ground, to study them with traditional archaeological methods.
Archaeologists investigate at ground level and discover the patterns are made up of mounds of earth. The evidence seems to indicate the geoglyphs are far older than anyone previously imagined.
So one culture that could have created these features was the Manhanza culture, which was around 7500 BC to 5500 BC.
The mysterious Stone Age Manhanza culture dates from a time before written history began. Almost nothing is known about them.
We know that Manhanza was basically a nomadic population.
Some suspect that the earthworks may have acted as a celestial calendar.
One of the things that would have been a concern to past people and that drove them to very carefully observe celestial phenomena, the solstices, the behavior of some planets and stars, and the moon, of course, was their understanding of the agricultural year and being able to plan ahead for the year to come.
In 2015, an investigation of the site using cutting-edge technology discovers that it might not be Stone Age at all. Archaeologists use a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, and date one earthwork back to just 800 BC, far more recent than first thought.
OSL dating is a kind of methodology where sand would have been exposed at one point to the sun. So it tells us when's the last time that sand saw light, giving us an indication when humans were building this feature.
800 BC is close to the dawn of the Iron Age, a time when monumental structures start to appear elsewhere on the Russian steppe.
That certainly does suggest it's more likely to be a kind of ceremonial structure because it's a very odd shape.
The scale of these vast earthworks is what kept them undiscovered for thousands of years. They are only visible from above. Who created them and who they were created for remains a mystery. At the climax of the Cold War, a U.S. spy satellite captures a disturbing image which triggers a CIA investigation.
You have to imagine what the CIA must have been thinking. Everything is a potential threat.
Hidden in a range of coastal hills are what appear to be nuclear missile silos.
Have we locked on to a launch site?
(1985). The U.S. and Russia are still in the grips of the Cold War. But now, a new power is rising in the East. China is stepping up its nuclear weapons program.
That's a concern from a national security perspective, not just for one nation, but for the entire globe.
The CIA's KH-22 spy satellite is tasked to fly over China. Looking down on the coastal highlands of Fujian province, it spots something suspicious. A series of unusually round structures set into the ground. Their circular openings pointing up into space.
Right at the top of the hit parade is always national security issues. So you look at an image like this and you immediately think, okay, is there a military purpose to this site?
To a military analyst, you see these big cones that are poking up in the middle. That just screams a missile.
Analysts fear the circular shapes could be missile silos for launching China's new ultimate weapon. At this time, China had recently completed long-range tests of their new nuclear ballistic missile, codenamed Dongfang, the Eastern Wind, or known simply as the DF-5.
China's always had a massive military as far as manpower is concerned, but by this point they were also catching up technologically. The United States was especially worried about long-range missiles and nuclear warheads.
Intelligence reports on these new missiles indicate they have alarming capabilities.
DF-5 is China's first ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile. It can carry 1 to 3 nuclear warheads, and it has a range of 7,500 to 9,300 miles.
Look on a map, that hits the mainland of the USA. So we're busy trying to understand where they're putting these launch sites.
The entire U.S. western seaboard would be within missile range.
Everyone's worried. What is China doing here?
The DF-5 affects the stability of the Pacific because the Chinese now have the technology to fire nuclear missiles against all of the American allies in the Pacific, as well as the American West Coast.
After the initial sighting, the CIA conducts intense satellite surveillance of the area. The picture it builds up creates a growing fear that China has built a vast network of missile silos along the eastern coastline of Fujian.
I would argue that the CIA, when it comes to imagery, doesn't often get it wrong.
The CIA takes this evidence to the president, and Reagan says, find out more about these structures that we found on the satellites, because from overhead, you can't really tell what they are.
So what do we do about this? We've locked onto what may be a missile launch site. Immediately, you've got to say, we need human intelligence on this.
CIA espionage operations against China from the 1980s are still highly classified. But according to unconfirmed reports, this image prompted the agency to launch a field investigation.
Washington wants to know what's going on here, so they send a spy, a guy named Howard H. Beck, on a state-sponsored tour of the mountains to see what's going on here.
The only way for the CIA to get their man in is posing as a tourist.
This is the height of the Cold War. It's nearly impossible to go to China on your own. And so he's very closely watched by the Chinese government and government officials, and he's tailed and he's told what he can and cannot photograph.
Tourism in China is tightly controlled at this time. Visitor permits are only issued after careful background checks, and most areas are forbidden to outsiders. Tourists follow a strict schedule, taken on guided tours of factories, schools, and communes. When CIA agent Beck finally gets to the assumed missile site, he's in for a complete surprise.
So he travels to the Fujian province. He gets to these structures and he starts taking pictures. And he doesn't know why he's allowed to take so many pictures, but it turns out that they're just housing complexes. They're massive round and square structures. They look like castles a bit, surrounded by agricultural land.
The unusual round structures are a remarkable kind of Chinese building traditional to the area, known as a tulo.
The tulo structures are defensive. They're like castles in Europe. The aim is to protect the inhabitants, the families, which could be up to 800 people inside them. They have their own source of water, they could preserve food in there, they could keep livestock, grow vegetables and so on, and protect themselves either from local marauding tribes or marauding bandits.
It's just a community living in a traditional housing structure.
These large round housing blocks actually date back to the time of Shakespeare and are unique to the area. The walls are made of earth mixed with bamboo and rice.
These tulo structures are in the records of the Ming Dynasty in the 1500s. So the CIA probably didn't need to go and investigate them because they definitely predate nuclear weapons. They probably could have just gone to a decent library.
Last time I checked, rice and mud do not pose a national security threat to the United States of America.
To be fair to the CIA, at the time they were looking at them, China was not the sort of hot tourist destination that it is now. So they were somewhat more mysterious.